Daniel Aversano, Senior Vice President of New Products and Client Solutions for Turner Broadcasting. I work across a myriad of different areas within Turner, but primarily around really determining new ways to better leverage Turner's assets using data, technology, as well as analytics. So I would say for the last, 10, 15 years, people have really started to perfect the science of targeting, primarily in the digital space. And it's come a very, very long way in a very, very short period of time. In television, on the other hand, it certainly has not happened nearly as quickly. That's for a few different reasons, right? So one, television is a very different medium. It's not addressable. It still is mass media, right? You air one 30-second commercial, and whoever happens to be tuning sees that message. However, that doesn't mean that you can't do targeting in television. Now, we haven't necessarily gone there yet, and there's a myriad of reasons why. The first challenge that historically has limited the targeting capability in television is really about data, right? So television is still primarily measured by Nielsen, right? Nielsen operates a panel called the National People Meter Sample, which is 51,000 individuals, 20,000 homes, and that's essentially the sample that generates all of the ratings, the C3 ratings, the commercial ratings within 3 days of viewing for national television. Now, that sample being the currency, the core challenge has been, historically, it's been very difficult to learn a lot more about Nielsen panelists. It's really only within the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years that Nielsen has been a very, very earnest effort through either data fusion or through direct matching to start to bring in other information about those panelists. Things like loyalty cards, right? So folks who have shopper cards, they're starting to match that data in. Credit card information. So most folks don't know this, but there actually are a handful of companies out there who are collecting, aggregating, and then matching credit card data back with media consumption behavior. So Nielsen started to make a lot of strides there, so that's helping. You also have other entrants into sort of what we would call the media ratings or media currency business. Folks like TRA, which is TiVo Research Analytics. Rentrax made a lot of strides in this area as well. Both of which now are, again, doing more data matching, more data fusion as well, where they're, again, linking behavioral information with the media consumption. So that whole data piece is by far and large the first piece. The second piece is history. Television is transacted on age-sex demographics and something called a CPM. Love it or hate it, a CPM is an equivalized metric, right? A CPM, you know what you paid last year, you can compare it to this year. So it's historical comparison. It also gives you in-market comparison. So you know what CPM you're going to pay on TNT, and you can compare that to Adult Swim, to NBC, to Fox. The second you move that sort of equivalized standard metric, and now you move to a heavy bottled water drinker, or perhaps it's a switcher, right? However you're defining that, you start to lose a lot of that history, right? You also lose the ability, if you don't have the same data in a lot of different places, to do in-market comparison. So that's the second big thing, I think, is sort of the history around the transaction of television. And third, and certainly not least, and I'll sort of bucket two things together here, talent and analytics. Television has, again, historically been transacted a certain way, and that's attracted a certain type of talent. And it historically hasn't been data scientists. It hasn't been predictive analytics. Right? All of a sudden now, I would say the biggest skill that's wanted on Madison Avenue and really with all the big media companies is analytics. I mean, everybody is scrambling and fighting for data scientists, right? So the ability to take all of these new data sets and actually do something with them. I mentioned earlier that television, it's a futures market in the sense that it's not addressable, right? We're going to sell you today what we think is going to happen tomorrow. That means we need analytics to have a really good sense of what's going to happen tomorrow. Pretty easy when you're doing that for two demographics. Very difficult when you're doing it for an endless number of audience targets defined on an endless number of data sets. Those, I would say, are probably the three biggest challenges. So at Turner, we are a content company. We're not a screen company, right? So I wouldn't necessarily describe us as a television company. Yes, we do have a lot of content that airs on television. We also have 100 plus apps that exist. Our Adult Swim and our kids brands have north of 77 million app downloads. We are truly a content company, and we look to put content on every screen. Now, that's a little bit challenging because the pace of technology, you have new operating systems every year, you have new devices every year. That's a different cycle to our business, right? Historically, when you were just putting content on one screen, right? The technology there, while it did upgrade a little bit, right? The big switch was from SD to HD, right? And everybody had to run new equipment, new distribution equipment. Now that pace and sort of the agile nature is changing, right? Because of mobile, because of tablets, and ultimately because of digital. But we play in those spaces very aggressively as well. So, I don't necessarily view that as a threat. I think it's an opportunity. And again, as it relates to things like audience targeting and data, what a great opportunity, right? The amount of data that we can collect on these devices, which we can then port into our DMP, the Turner Data Cloud. Now our consumer sits in the middle, and we can profile them based on what they're watching on TV, what they're doing on their smartphone, right? All the content consumption across screens, but we're also getting other data from devices, right? Smartphones are the best example. Geolocation, right? We now can ingest geolocation data and start to profile where our consumers are going. And then we can better program to them, right? So we can create better content for them, distribute that content in better ways, and we can now better pair those consumers with advertisers in a way that hopefully drives more ROI for them. So it's a big opportunity. Let me pivot to the privacy piece because that's a huge challenge. There are lots of privacy concerns. Anything and everything that we do is always privacy compliant, right? From adhering to things like COPA and in the kids space with Cartoon Network and Boomerang and to some extent even Adult Swim. Always privacy compliant first and foremost, right? And ultimately we need to, the industry as a whole, marketers, agencies, media companies, need to make sure that they're protecting data first and foremost. Data needs to be kept in a very anonymized fashion. It needs to be matched in an anonymized fashion. And there are sound ways to do that. So I think, one, just embedding very, very good privacy practices internally is good, but two, back to that education piece, we frankly all need to do a better job of informing consumers what we want to do with this data, right? We're not trying to steal a credit card, right? We're not trying to get one over on them. In our case, we're trying to give them better content and in a place where they actually want it. And we're trying to make sure that they're seeing advertising that's more relevant to them, right? So yes, I work in this industry, but I'm still a consumer. Nothing drives me more crazy, right? I go on the internet one day and this is a true story, about a year and a half ago, I was looking for a new shed for my backyard. 1 week, looking online, going to different websites. For the next 6 months, every display ad I saw was for a new shed. That decision was long gone 6 months ago, and I was still seeing them. Wasn't relevant to me. In fact, it was actually annoying me at that point. Like, I didn't need a shed anymore. I was kind of over it, yet I kept seeing it, right? So things like that, annoy consumers. If we can ingest better data in more real time, you can create a better experience, both with content and with advertising. So we recently announced last week the launch of Turner Data Cloud. Turner Data Cloud is our DMP. It's a central repository which will house all of our first-party data in a very, very privacy-compliant way. The next really important component is bringing in third-party data, right? So television data. We need to bring in television data from either set-top box providers or ACR vendors or CE manufacturers. We need to bring in other demographic information. So you have other partners in that space who can start to append more information, right? We might collect this much on our own, but then you have this giant long tail of other information that you ideally try to direct match in. It's challenging. It's very, very challenging. The good news is, a few years back, we very smartly moved to things like a unified cookie. So we actually had a big base of data to start with. And now we're in the process of now that Turner Data Cloud has stood up, starting to put lots and lots of other third-party data in here. The last piece of that equation is actually data from our advertiser partners. So one of the things in all the solutions that we're building, the opportunity so that our advertiser partners can actually drop their data into this world as well, not because we need their data, but so that they can better activate within our audiences. So if they've built a segmentation, they have a very big CRM file, right? And maybe they've identified this portion of their CRM database that they're going to go after with this campaign. Now we can ingest that information, find those people within our footprint, and start to target them. Now, keeping all of that data together, it's very challenging. Ultimately, we're very fortunate. We have a gentleman by the name of Stefano Kim, who's our new chief data strategist, who's standing up our data stack, and right next to it and around it is our technology stack. And all of those things start to work together. We need folks who are true CRM experts, folks who are data experts, folks who are expert in sort of the housing and aggregation of data, but then can partner internally with other groups. So within Turner, my group is again very focused on new products and client solutions. So we need to be able to lean back into our data team and Stefano's team and our tech team to help build out the solutions that we're building on behalf of clients. Howard Chimmel, who's our chief research officer, likewise needs to better leverage that data to fuel how we do tuning campaigns, right? So when we launched Last Ship last year, the idea that we need to better mine our internal data so that we can better promote that program, both on our networks, so on air, cross channel, as well as in paid media. So that's the other side of it. So the notion that you have a data team that sort of sits in the middle, you have all these other core constituents that can dive into that. It's really, really important. It has to be this macro team effort.